I trusted her completely for 3 years. Then I discovered what she was hiding behind my back. At 35, I thought I understood the depths of human betrayal. I was catastrophically wrong. When Victoria told me maybe we shouldn't be together if you can't handle my ex around, I agreed without hesitation. And when she texted, "Where are you?" that Friday night, I sent her a selfie from Singapore's Changi Airport first-class lounge. Job transfer accepted. Ticket one way. I'm not the type of man who keeps score in relationships, but even I have limits that, when crossed, unleash consequences beyond imagination. My name is Christopher, 35 years old, a senior investment strategist who had spent the better part of a decade clawing my way up the financial elite. For the past 3 years, I had been utterly devoted to Victoria, a woman who possessed that rare magnetism that could transform any gathering into her personal stage. She radiated charisma, that intoxicating spark of energy that drew people into her orbit like moths to flame. When we first met at an exclusive rooftop bar in Manhattan, I thought she was exactly what my structured, numbers-driven life needed. Someone vivacious, someone unpredictable, someone who could drag me away from quarterly reports and board meetings into a world where passion mattered more than profit margins. At first, I overlooked what I now recognize as glaring red flags. Victoria mentioned her ex-boyfriend Marcus in casual conversation with a frequency that should have made my blood run cold, but I told myself it was harmless nostalgia. She framed their connection as innocent history, claiming they had grown up in the same wealthy Connecticut circles and still shared mutual friends from their prep school days. I figured sophisticated people could maintain cordial relationships with their exes if they had truly moved on, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt. What a fool I was. But as months turned into years, it became devastatingly clear that Marcus wasn't just a chapter from her past. He was the ghost haunting our present, the shadow poisoning our future. It began with seemingly innocent intrusions that gradually escalated into soul-crushing violations of our relationship. A text message here, a phone call there, then elaborate group gatherings where Marcus always seemed to materialize like some unwanted specter. I remember one particular evening when Victoria and I had planned an intimate dinner at our penthouse apartment. She had prepared herb-crusted salmon, opened a bottle of vintage Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and we were just settling into what should have been a perfect evening when her phone buzzed against the marble countertop. She glanced at the screen, and I watched her entire face illuminate with a smile I had never seen her give me. She excused herself with a casual, "I'll be right back, darling." 10 minutes crawled by, then 20, then 30. The salmon grew cold, the wine lost its perfect temperature, and my patience evaporated completely. When I went to find her, she was in our private study, laughing into her phone with an intimacy that made my stomach churn with a sickness I had never experienced. I heard his name float through her conversation like a prayer. She noticed me standing in the doorway and turned away quickly, lowering her voice to a whisper, muttering something about him going through a particularly difficult divorce settlement. Our dinner was ruined, but more than that, something fundamental had shifted in our relationship's foundation. Friends began to notice the dysfunction too. My colleague Harrison once remarked with uncomfortable accuracy that Marcus might as well be the third person in our marriage, since we seemed to arrange our entire social calendar around his availability. I laughed it off at the time, but his words echoed in my head during countless sleepless nights that followed. At exclusive gatherings in the Hamptons, Marcus would appear uninvited, claiming Victoria had mentioned the event to him in passing. He acted like he belonged in our circle, always positioning himself too close to her during conversations, always finding excuses to touch her arm or whisper secrets in her ear that made her giggle like a schoolgirl. The way she responded to his attention was different, softer, more vulnerable than anything she had ever shown me. She would brush off my concerns as his harmless personality quirks, insisting I was misreading innocent friendship. The first devastating crack in our relationship's facade came during a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Victoria and I had been celebrating a significant promotion I had earned, leading a new private wealth management division, and she insisted we join some of her old friends for after-party drinks at an exclusive members-only club. When we arrived at the dimly lit establishment, Marcus was already there, occupying the prime seat at our reserved table. He sat inappropriately close to her throughout the evening, whispered constantly in her ear, and the way she smiled at him, different and intimate and completely foreign to anything I had witnessed in our 3 years together, made my chest tighten with a jealousy so intense it felt like physical pain. When I confronted her later that night in our bedroom, she accused me of being paranoid and emotionally insecure. That word, insecure, became her favorite weapon of emotional destruction. It was her go-to defense mechanism whenever I dared question why Marcus had to infiltrate every aspect of our life together, why his name appeared on her phone screen during our most intimate moments, why he still possessed the security codes to her private office, why she would drop everything, including our plans, whenever he claimed to need her support. She painted herself as the innocent victim of my jealousy and me as the controlling, possessive partner who couldn't handle her having male friends. Months of this psychological warfare slowly eroded my self-confidence. I started questioning my own perceptions, second-guessing whether I was overreacting to situations that seemed obviously inappropriate. But the pattern never changed, only intensified. The final straw that shattered my remaining tolerance came on a Wednesday evening that I will never forget as long as I live. I had stayed late at the office preparing a crucial presentation for potential clients worth over $50 million in assets under management. When I finally returned home to our penthouse around 11 o'clock, exhausted and looking forward to unwinding with Victoria, I discovered Marcus sitting comfortably on our Italian leather sofa, eating expensive takeout sushi with her like he was the man of the house. She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed or apologetic. She greeted me with casual indifference, introduced him as though we hadn't already endured countless uncomfortable encounters, and continued their conversation about some mutual friend's upcoming wedding as if I were merely an inconvenient interruption to their evening together. That night, we had our first real confrontation. I didn't hold back my fury or try to moderate my tone. I told her exactly how completely disrespected and betrayed I felt, how her constant emotional availability to Marcus crossed every reasonable boundary, how this wasn't about insecurity, but about basic relationship respect and commitment. She listened in stony silence, occasionally sipping her wine, her expression growing colder with each word I spoke. When I finished my impassioned speech, she put down her crystal wine glass, leaned back in her chair with aristocratic composure, and delivered words that sliced through my heart like a blade heated in hell's own fires. Maybe we shouldn't be together if you can't handle my ex around. The silence that followed felt like standing in the aftermath of an emotional nuclear explosion. I didn't yell, I didn't plead, I didn't grovel for her reconsideration. I simply nodded with newfound clarity and said, "Maybe you're absolutely right." I watched her expression flicker with what might have been surprise, perhaps expecting me to argue or beg for another chance, but I had reached my breaking point. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me, a cold determination replacing the desperate need for her approval. The next morning at work, everything changed with divine timing. My supervisor called me into his corner office with unexpected news that would alter the trajectory of my entire existence. The firm was expanding their Asian operations, opening a prestigious new regional headquarters in Singapore. They wanted someone experienced, someone they trusted implicitly, to oversee the wealth management division for their ultra-high net worth clients across Southeast Asia. It represented a massive promotion with significantly increased responsibilities, a compensation package that would make me financially independent, and the opportunity to build something extraordinary from the ground up. But it required immediate relocation within 6 weeks. Most rational people would have requested time to consider such a life-altering decision, weighed the pros and cons carefully. For me, it felt like divine intervention answering prayers I hadn't even realized I was making. Victoria had drawn her line in the sand with surgical precision. I refused to spend another day fighting for a woman who made me compete with a ghost from her past for basic respect and attention. The Singapore opportunity was my chance to escape everything toxic and soul-destroying that my life had become. I didn't tell her about the offer immediately. Instead, I maintained a facade of normalcy while quietly orchestrating my complete disappearance from her world. I sold unnecessary possessions, organized my financial affairs, updated my passport, and booked my one-way ticket to a new life. Each step felt like liberation, a quiet rebellion against everything that had been slowly poisoning my spirit for 3 exhausting years. Meanwhile, Victoria grew increasingly distant, spending more time with Marcus and less time pretending to care about our relationship's deterioration. Her emotional withdrawal made it easier for me to detach completely. I stopped asking questions about her whereabouts, stopped caring who she spent her evenings with, stopped investing any emotional energy in someone who had already checked out. She seemed satisfied with my newfound silence, mistaking my strategic withdrawal for defeated resignation. Then came that pivotal Friday night. She was out again with friends, though I knew with absolute certainty that Marcus would be there, probably sitting too close, probably whispering in her ear, probably treating her like his personal property while she encouraged his inappropriate behavior. Around 10:30, as I sat in Singapore's magnificent Changi Airport lounge waiting for my midnight flight, my phone buzzed with her text. "Where are you?" The timing was absolutely perfect, almost cinematically poetic. She probably expected me to be sulking at home, wallowing in self-pity, waiting pathetically for her return like some abandoned puppy. Instead, I lifted my phone, angled the camera with deliberate precision, and captured the moment that would define the rest of our story. Me reclining in the exclusive first-class lounge, my boarding pass clearly visible in my hand, a glass of Dom Perignon champagne sparkling on the polished table beside me, the Singapore Airlines logo gleaming in the background. Underneath the image, I typed with surgical precision, "Job transfer accepted. Take it one way." I hit send and felt a rush of satisfaction so intense it bordered on euphoria. For a moment, I simply stared at our message thread, imagining her face when she opened that image, her smug certainty cracking like fragile porcelain, her illusion of control dissolving completely. No explanations, no dramatic arguments, just one undeniable fact. I was gone. When boarding was announced, I felt lighter than I had in years. Each step toward the gate carried me further from a relationship built on disrespect and emotional manipulation. I didn't know what awaited me in Singapore, but I knew exactly what I was leaving behind, and that knowledge filled me with profound peace. When I stepped off the plane into Singapore's tropical embrace, it felt like walking into a completely different existence. The airport alone radiated ambition and possibility, with towers of glass and steel stretching toward the horizon like monuments to human achievement. Even at 2 in the morning, the city hummed with energy and opportunity. The firm had arranged temporary accommodation in a luxury-serviced apartment near the financial district, sleek and modern with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Marina Bay. Within days, I was completely absorbed in meetings, strategy sessions, and endless introductions to Singapore's financial elite. The workload was demanding, but I thrived on the challenge and complexity. My new role transcended simple number management. I was architecting the future of wealth preservation for some of Asia's most influential families. After years of feeling undervalued while drowning in Victoria's emotional chaos, I finally had a clear sense of purpose and professional dignity. But shadows from the past don't disappear overnight. Victoria's name continued appearing on my phone with relentless persistence. The morning after I sent her that airport selfie, she called me 17 times in succession. By the 18th attempt, she left a voicemail that oscillated wildly between fury and disbelief. She accused me of humiliating her publicly, of abandoning her like a coward, of blindsiding her without any explanation or warning. I didn't respond to her accusations. Over the following weeks, her emotional tone shifted dramatically. The angry messages transformed into desperate pleading, then evolved into carefully crafted emails painting herself as misunderstood and abandoned. She claimed Marcus was merely a friend, that I had completely overreacted to innocent interactions, that she was willing to establish boundaries if I would just reconsider our relationship. She begged me to return, promising she could change, insisting she finally understood my perspective. I read every word once, then deleted them without responding. I had absolutely no intention of being pulled back into that destructive cycle. Still, I would be dishonest if I claimed her absence didn't create an emotional void. After 3 years together, even dysfunction becomes familiar routine. Some nights, I found myself staring at Singapore's glittering skyline, wondering what she was doing, whether she was with Marcus, whether she ever truly cared about our relationship, or if I had been nothing more than a convenient placeholder. But those melancholy thoughts grew weaker each time I immersed myself in my new professional challenges. Singapore had a way of consuming your attention completely. The city pulsed with ambition and possibility, demanding your complete focus and rewarding those willing to embrace its relentless pace. My team consisted of brilliant, driven professionals from around the globe. One colleague, Isabella, particularly distinguished herself. She wasn't technically a direct employee, but rather an external consultant, a brilliant Swiss-Italian attorney specializing in international tax law and asset protection strategies. The first time we collaborated, she navigated a complex negotiation involving multiple jurisdictions with such elegant precision that the entire room fell silent in appreciation. She wasn't just intellectually gifted. She possessed a quiet authority that commanded respect without ever raising her voice or resorting to aggressive tactics. We began working together regularly when she was reviewing complex trust structures for our ultra-high net worth clients. What started as professional courtesy coffee meetings evolved into discussions about everything from international law to Singapore's hidden cultural treasures. She introduced me to neighborhoods beyond the polished business districts, places where authentic culture thrived away from tourist attractions. For the first time since leaving New York, I felt like I had found someone who understood both professional ambition and personal depth. Meanwhile, Victoria's grip on my attention was finally loosening, though she wasn't ready to release me completely. 2 months after my departure, she managed to reach me using a different phone number I didn't recognize. I answered without thinking, and her voice hit me like an emotional ambush. She sounded frantic, desperate, completely different from the composed woman who had once dismissed my concerns with aristocratic indifference. She accused me of destroying her life, claimed Marcus had been manipulating both of us, and said she had no one left to turn to for support. Apparently, Marcus had been pressuring her into co-signing various investment opportunities that turned out to be questionable loan arrangements. She admitted she was drowning in financial obligations she didn't fully understand. I listened in complete silence. Every instinct wanted me to respond with cutting sarcasm, to remind her how many times she had chosen him over me, how completely she had dismissed my warnings about his character. But I restrained myself. I simply said, "You'll figure it out," and ended the call. That conversation left me unsettled, not because I wanted her back, but because I realized how rapidly her perfect life was unraveling. Part of me wondered whether Marcus's business dealings were even legal. He had always struck me as someone who survived on charm and questionable shortcuts rather than genuine competence. I tried not to dwell on her problems. My life in Singapore demanded complete attention. My influence within the firm expanded rapidly, and I began participating in meetings with regional directors, closing deals that would have been impossible to access in New York. The company provided every luxury: premium housing, private transportation, exclusive social events designed to integrate expatriate executives into Singapore's elite circles. It was a golden cage in many ways, but one I embraced wholeheartedly. During weekends, Isabella introduced me to communities outside the corporate world. Artists, entrepreneurs, and intellectuals gathered in hidden cafes, exchanging ideas until dawn. It was a side of Singapore most business travelers never experienced, and it provided the cultural grounding I needed. Through those connections, I started investing in promising ventures: technology startups, logistics services, always with Isabella's legal expertise guiding my decisions. For the first time in my adult life, my wealth wasn't just accumulating in traditional accounts. I was building something tangible and meaningful. Victoria's shadow returned periodically. Another desperate voicemail, another carefully crafted email. Once, she even attempted to reach me through my sister back in Connecticut. My sister forwarded the message, completely unimpressed. Victoria had written a melodramatic sob story about betrayal and abandonment, claiming I had left her for material luxury. My sister's response was perfectly concise: "He owes you nothing." That simple statement of family loyalty felt like a final nail in the coffin of whatever guilt I might have carried about my decision to leave. Then came the revelation that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening, and I had just concluded a particularly intense strategy meeting when I noticed a missed call from an unknown international number. Minutes later, an email arrived with no subject line, just an attachment and a brief message: "Thought you should see this immediately." The attachment was a scanned legal document, loan papers bearing Victoria's signature, but with my name listed as primary guarantor for Marcus's business ventures. My heart stopped as I scrolled through page after page, realizing she had attempted to legally bind me to Marcus's financial obligations without my knowledge or consent. The dates were from just weeks before my departure for Singapore. If I hadn't moved when I did, if I hadn't severed all ties with surgical precision, there was an excellent chance those documents would have appeared in my mailbox unnoticed. My chest tightened as I contemplated the implications. She had been willing to risk my career, my financial security, everything I had worked to build, just to protect Marcus from the consequences of his questionable decisions. Suddenly, her desperate phone calls and pleading emails weren't just pathetic attempts to reconcile. They were dangerous manipulations designed to drag me back into a web of potential legal liability. She hadn't just played with my emotions. She had nearly destroyed my future without my knowledge or permission. That night, I sat by my apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows long after Singapore's skyline had settled into its nocturnal glow. I replayed every moment of our relationship, every warning sign I had dismissed, every red flag I had rationalized away. The late-night calls with Marcus, his constant presence in our life, her dismissal of my legitimate concerns, and finally that devastating line, "Maybe we shouldn't be together if you can't handle my ex around." She had been absolutely correct, though not in the way she intended. I couldn't handle her ex, not because of insecurity or jealousy, but because of basic survival instinct. Walking away when I did had literally saved my professional reputation and financial future. By sunrise, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Victoria wasn't finished with her manipulation attempts. She had lost control over me, lost the financial shield I might have unknowingly provided, and she wasn't going to surrender without trying to drag me back into her chaos. What I didn't anticipate was just how desperately far she was willing to go. I thought geographic distance would be sufficient to permanently sever ties with Victoria. Oceans separated us, demanding new responsibilities consumed my attention, and every day in Singapore carried me further from the toxic relationship I had escaped. For several months, the strategy worked perfectly. I immersed myself completely in my expanding role, built meaningful professional relationships, and deepened my partnership with Isabella. Life had achieved a stability that felt almost too good to be true. Then one morning, I arrived at our prestigious office building to find the normally composed receptionist visibly shaken. She leaned toward me and whispered urgently, "There's someone waiting for you in the main lobby who claims to be your girlfriend." I assumed it was a client or perhaps one of our regional partners making an unexpected visit. But when I stepped into the marble-floored atrium, my blood transformed into ice water. Victoria was standing there, eyes swollen from crying, expensive luggage scattered at her feet, looking like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. She spotted me instantly and rushed forward with desperate energy. Security personnel moved to intercept, but she raised her hands frantically, insisting she only needed 5 minutes to explain everything. The lobby had gone completely silent, with employees and clients watching this emotional spectacle unfold. The last thing I wanted was a public scene that could damage my professional reputation, so I reluctantly agreed to speak privately in a small conference room. The moment the door closed behind us, she completely broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she launched into a frantic, barely coherent monologue. She claimed Marcus had systematically ruined her life, that he had manipulated her into fraudulent business schemes she hadn't understood, that her entire world was collapsing around her. She spoke rapidly about debt collectors making threatening phone calls, government investigators asking detailed questions, and legal proceedings that could result in criminal charges. She begged me to help her navigate the crisis, claiming I was the only person left in her life who possessed both the financial expertise and personal integrity she could trust. I listened in complete silence, studying this broken woman who bore little resemblance to the confident socialite who had once dismissed my concerns with aristocratic indifference. Her voice shook, her hands trembled, but my sympathy remained completely absent. Instead, I found myself thinking about those forged loan documents with my name fraudulently attached, wondering whether she had signed them out of desperation or calculated malice. When she finally exhausted herself, I simply said, "You shouldn't have come here." Then I opened the conference room door and motioned for security personnel to escort her from the building. As they guided her toward the exit, she shouted over her shoulder with raw desperation. "You'll regret abandoning me, Christopher. Marcus is more dangerous than you realize." For the remainder of that day, I couldn't focus on anything productive. My colleagues noticed my distraction, but I deflected their concerned inquiries. In truth, her unexpected appearance had shaken me more than I cared to admit. She had crossed international borders to find me, dragging Marcus's shadow across continents. If her claims about government investigations were accurate, then whatever storm surrounded Marcus was significantly larger and more dangerous than I had originally understood. Later that week, Isabella invited me to an intimate dinner party at a friend's private villa. It was a small gathering of lawyers, investment professionals, and local entrepreneurs sharing grilled seafood and vintage wine. The conversation naturally turned to recent financial scandals making headlines across Asia. One of the guests, a senior banker with extensive regulatory connections, mentioned a name that made my spine stiffen with recognition: Marcus. I remained silent, listening intently as the banker explained that Marcus had been flagged by international financial authorities for suspicious cross-border transfers, shell company formations, and potential money laundering through small business investments. According to the banker's information, the investigation was expanding rapidly, potentially involving multiple jurisdictions and dozens of victims. He speculated that several people connected to Marcus's schemes might face serious charges for conspiracy, fraud, and financial crimes they might not have fully understood. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as the implications became clear. Victoria hadn't been exaggerating about the investigation's severity. During the drive home, I confided everything to Isabella: Marcus's history with Victoria, the forged loan documents, Victoria's desperate visit to my office. She listened with her lawyer's analytical mind, processing each detail carefully. Finally, she said with professional gravity, "If your name appears anywhere on Marcus's business documents, you need to protect yourself immediately and comprehensively. Even if signatures are forged, you'll need to prove your innocence conclusively." The following morning, we filed detailed statements with relevant authorities, preemptively disclosing the fraudulent documents Victoria had created. Isabella's legal team constructed multiple layers of protection around my reputation and assets before any potential storm could reach me. I felt relief, but also burning anger. The woman I had once trusted completely had nearly destroyed my career and future, while the man she chose over me had transformed her into expendable collateral damage. But Victoria's desperation hadn't reached its peak yet. 2 weeks after her office ambush, she appeared again, this time outside my luxury apartment building. I discovered her as I returned from work, standing near the entrance clutching a paper shopping bag like some homeless person seeking charity. She approached me before I could retreat, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "Please just listen for 1 minute. I never meant to involve you in Marcus's schemes." I didn't understand what I was signing. Now investigators think I'm his primary accomplice, and I'm terrified. Her words tumbled out like water from a broken pipe, barely controlled and increasingly frantic. She admitted she had signed legal documents without reading them carefully, trusted Marcus's explanations blindly, and now found herself trapped in a legal nightmare she couldn't escape. She begged me to provide character testimony, to tell authorities she was naive rather than criminal, to help her prove she was a victim rather than a willing participant. I stared at her with complete incredulity, stunned by the audacity of her request. "You used my name without my consent," I said with cold precision. "You attempted to tie me legally to his criminal enterprise, and now you expect me to risk my reputation to save yours?" She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes that held no trace of her former confidence. "I was stupid, Christopher. I know that now. But if I go to prison, they'll destroy everything I've ever worked for. You don't understand how ruthless Marcus can be. He won't protect me when investigators start demanding answers. He'll sacrifice me to save himself." That revelation hit me harder than expected, not because it generated sympathy, but because it illuminated the complete truth about their relationship. Marcus had never genuinely cared for her. She was just another expendable shield, another disposable pawn in his elaborate schemes. The same man she had chosen over me repeatedly, the man she had prioritized above our relationship's basic respect, had abandoned her to face criminal prosecution alone. But sympathy is not the same as forgiveness, and understanding someone's situation doesn't create an obligation to rescue them from consequences they created. I shook my head definitively, walked past her toward the building's entrance, and allowed the security guard to handle her removal. Her desperate cries echoed behind me as the elevator doors closed, but I felt no regret about my decision. The following morning brought a message from Isabella with an attached intelligence report. Marcus had fled his home country under suspicious circumstances, apparently attempting to escape prosecution. International authorities were actively tracking his movements, and Victoria had been officially named a person of interest in their expanding investigation. If evidence proved her willing participation, she could face charges of fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering that carried significant prison sentences. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the report with a mixture of vindication and disbelief. Karma doesn't always operate quickly, but when it finally moves, it strikes with devastating precision. Victoria had once told me dismissively that maybe we shouldn't be together if I couldn't handle her ex. Now that same ex had pulled her into a legal whirlpool she couldn't escape, while I had avoided destruction by walking away with dignity intact. Still, part of me wondered whether her desperation would drive her to even more dangerous decisions. Would she risk everything for one final attempt to drag me back into her chaos? I didn't have to wonder long. One evening, as I left the office after a particularly productive day, I noticed a white envelope tucked under my car's windshield wiper. Inside was a handwritten note that made my blood run cold. They're investigating everyone connected to Marcus. If you don't help me prove my innocence, I'll tell them you knew about everything from the beginning. I stood frozen in the parking garage, Singapore's city lights blurring around me as the note's implications sank in. This wasn't just desperate pleading. It was calculated blackmail. Victoria wasn't just asking for help anymore. She was threatening to destroy me if I refused to become her lifeline. That note burned in my pocket for hours before I decided on my response. Victoria's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, the ink slightly smudged as though her hands had trembled while writing. The message itself was brief but carried devastating implications. They're investigating everyone connected to Marcus. If you don't help me prove my innocence, I'll tell them you knew about everything from the beginning. It wasn't just fear speaking, it was pure, desperate blackmail. I brought the note immediately to Isabella, who read it without any visible emotional reaction, then folded it precisely and placed it back on the table between us. She's completely cornered, Isabella said with professional detachment. Desperate people often lash out irrationally, but you have absolutely nothing to fear. We've already established a comprehensive documentary record of disclosure. If she attempts to implicate you falsely, it won't succeed. Her calm confidence reassured me, but I couldn't ignore the persistent unease. Victoria wasn't a calculating strategist. She was chaotic and unpredictable. A cornered person can inflict significant damage even when their ultimate defeat is inevitable. I immediately doubled my security precautions, changed all my contact information, added multiple layers of protection at both work and home, and formally notified authorities about her threatening behavior. Everything was documented now. Every desperate phone call, every manipulative email, every attempt she made to drag me back into her self-created nightmare. The legal record was absolutely clear about who was the victim and who was the perpetrator in this situation. 1 month later, the storm finally reached its devastating conclusion. I was attending a prestigious corporate gala with Isabella at one of Singapore's most exclusive hotels. The ballroom filled with the sophisticated hum of conversation, crystal glasses creating musical notes, and soft jazz providing elegant background ambience. Midway through the evening, a ripple of excited whispers spread across the gathering like electricity. Phones illuminated throughout the room as people checked breaking news alerts. Isabella leaned toward me and whispered with barely contained satisfaction, "It's about Marcus." News had broken that he had been arrested while attempting to flee through Cyprus using multiple false identities. International authorities had been tracking his movements for weeks, and he was finally captured with forged passports, encrypted computer drives, and millions in untraceable cryptocurrency. Within hours, detailed information flooded news outlets across multiple continents. The scope of his criminal enterprise was staggering. Hundreds of millions laundered through intricate shell company networks, fraudulent investment schemes targeting wealthy individuals, and a trail of financially ruined lives spanning 3 countries. And at the center of numerous suspicious transactions, Victoria's name appeared repeatedly as both signatory and beneficiary. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from acquaintances back in New York. Some remembered my relationship history with Victoria clearly, while others had only vague recollections. But everyone wanted to discuss the scandal. I maintained complete silence, watching the situation unfold from the comfortable distance of a glittering Singapore gala, feeling strange detachment as though observing the final act of a tragic play I had wisely exited years earlier. Victoria's fall from grace was swift and absolute. The same social circles that had once tolerated her inappropriate closeness with Marcus now distanced themselves with horror and disgust. Her family publicly cut all ties, claiming complete ignorance of her choices and decisions. Former friends avoided any association with her name. Even online, her identity became synonymous with scandal and criminal behavior. Photographs began appearing in international media. Victoria entering various courthouses with her eyes hidden behind dark designer sunglasses, flanked by expensive criminal defense attorneys, looking like a shadow of the confident woman who had once commanded every room she entered. She attempted one final desperate contact through email, arriving late at night like a ghost from my past. The message was longer than any previous communication, filled with admissions I had waited years to hear. She wrote extensively about being blinded by Marcus's manipulation, trapped by promises of wealth and social elevation, confused by legal documents she should have scrutinized more carefully. She admitted she had betrayed my trust, confessed she had signed documents involving my name without proper consideration, and begged me to at least confirm to investigators that I had no knowledge of Marcus's criminal activities. The irony was overwhelming. She wasn't asking me to save her anymore, only to protect myself by telling the truth. I didn't respond to her final plea. Isabella forwarded the email directly to relevant authorities, where it became another piece of evidence in the expanding case against both Victoria and Marcus. Weeks stretched into months as the legal proceedings expanded, pulling in accomplices and victims from multiple countries. Marcus, once arrogantly untouchable, appeared in news photographs wearing prison uniforms, his characteristic smug confidence replaced by the hollow stare of a man facing decades behind bars. Victoria, confronting charges of conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering, eventually negotiated a plea agreement to reduce her potential sentence in exchange for complete cooperation with prosecutors. Even with that cooperation, she lost everything that had once defined her identity: her career in luxury real estate, her social reputation, her financial security, and ultimately her freedom. Meanwhile, my life in Singapore continued to flourish beyond my wildest expectations. Professional responsibilities expanded, personal investments grew exponentially, and my relationship with Isabella evolved from business partnership into something deeper and more meaningful. She grounded me, reminding me daily that true strength comes not from clinging to chaos, but from choosing stability, integrity, and authentic connection. Together, we built something quiet but unshakable, far removed from the storms and drama that had once consumed my emotional energy. The contrast between my current peace and my former turmoil was so stark it sometimes felt like comparing two completely different lifetimes. The final chapter of Victoria's story arrived unexpectedly through traditional mail forwarded through my company's office. It was a letter written from a federal detention facility, her handwriting steadier than before, the tone notably less frantic and more reflective. She wrote extensively about regret, not just for what she had done to me personally, but for the cascade of choices that had led her to incarceration. She admitted with painful honesty that Marcus had never truly loved her, that he had used her systematically as both a shield and a scapegoat, and that the only person who had ever genuinely cared for her well-being was the one she had pushed away with cruel indifference. I read her letter once, carefully folded it, and placed it in a desk drawer without responding. I felt neither triumph nor bitterness, only a sense of finality and closure. Her words were an echo from a life I no longer inhabited, a ghost from a past I had successfully transcended. Months later, I attended another corporate gala with Isabella, but this time the whispered conversations weren't about scandal or criminal prosecution. They focused on opportunity, innovation, and future growth. Business deals were being negotiated, strategic partnerships formed, ambitious futures mapped out across multiple industries. I stood at the edge of the venue's spectacular balcony, overlooking Singapore's skyline as it sparkled like a constellation of human ambition and achievement. The city had become my sanctuary, my complete reinvention, my proof that sometimes the best response to betrayal is simply to build something better. I thought back to that pivotal night in Changi Airport's first-class lounge when I sent Victoria that photograph of my boarding pass. That single decisive action had been the exact moment where my life split definitively into before and after. Before represented chaos, jealousy, manipulation, and near destruction. After represented clarity, growth, success, and eventual profound peace. People often ask whether I ever think about Victoria, whether I wonder what our relationship could have become if circumstances had been different. The answer is simple. I don't, because what happened was exactly what needed to happen for both of us to learn the most important lessons of our lives. She told me once with aristocratic dismissiveness that maybe we shouldn't be together if I couldn't handle her ex around. She was absolutely right, though not in the way she intended. I couldn't handle her ex because her ex was a criminal who destroyed everyone he touched, and I refused to let him destroy me along with her. The consequences of that wisdom were devastatingly real. Marcus sits behind bars, his empire of fraud reduced to ashes and legal documents. Victoria faces years of rebuilding a life shattered entirely by her own choices and misplaced loyalty. And me? I walked forward completely untouched, stronger and wiser for having escaped before the inevitable destruction consumed everything in its path. Karma doesn't need witnesses to operate, but sometimes it delivers its justice so publicly and dramatically that no one can deny its power. The woman who once made me feel insecure about questioning her inappropriate relationship with another man ended up losing everything because of that same relationship. The man she chose over me, the one she protected and prioritized, became the architect of her complete downfall. And in the end, the only thing left for me to do was keep walking confidently toward my future, away from the smoking ruins of their self-created destruction. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't what you do to someone who wronged you. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let their chaos define your destiny, choosing to build something beautiful instead of getting trapped in their web of lies and manipulation. That night in Singapore, standing on that hotel balcony with Isabella beside me, watching the city lights stretch toward infinity, I realized something profound about human nature and the choices we make. Victoria had every opportunity to choose loyalty, honesty, and genuine love. Instead, she chose excitement, danger, and the intoxicating thrill of playing with fire. Now she knows exactly what it feels like to get burned. And I know exactly what it feels like to be free. If you've made it this far, you understand what it means to choose yourself over chaos. Hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story will show you exactly what happens when people think they can manipulate someone who's learned to value their own peace above everything else. Trust me, the revenge gets even sweeter than this.